Welcome to the March 2020 edition of the Disruptive Insight series, Disruptive Selling series. Stepping up, this is our topic for today. It's a big one. Stepping up to address the uninsured risks and inadequate insurance crisis. Let's jump in. We have a lot to cover. Let's jump in. So first, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Always, we appreciate you taking the time. I'm Frank Panaccio. I'm the principal co-founder of Oceanus Partners, a resource pro company. We specialize in training, coaching, consulting with insurance professionals, including producers and brokers. And what we're going to cover today is the driving forces that created this uninsured risk and inadequate insurance crisis. What's really causing the problem that we're talking about? And then we're going to dive into what are those most primary ones? What are the top of mind ones? The ones that we need to address first and foremost. We could talk for days about inadequate and underinsurance, but over the next 40 to 50 minutes, we're going to take on the ones that we really need to move the needle on immediately. And then how to disrupt the buyer's ineffective process to manage risk and buy insurance, which, as you'll see in a moment, is one of the driving forces that's creating this crisis. So we're going to talk about what's causing it. What are some of the examples of to really get you to see, or to do our best to get you to see the primary risks, to affirm the premise, and then what do we do about it, which is critically important. We have to know what to do about it. So let's look at the three primary driving forces. First and foremost is we live in a world of increasingly complexity of risks. As we present you this webinar, we're in the early stages, if not, well, we don't know where we are in the process, but the pandemic is certainly exploding. It's not something we talked about 6 months ago. And that's not the only risk that is becoming more and more complex. It's the main focus today. It's likely going to change things forever. But we'll touch base a little later about the cyber risks. How increasingly complex are those? How the global economy, supply chains, the signing of contracts is becoming increasingly complex. The risks that arise out of the signing of a contract are becoming more complex. The world itself is just more complex, causing some people to just shut down and say, well, I'll do the best I can. Nothing bad has happened. Let me just see if I can get the best price and call it a day, which is one of the main factors driving inadequate insurance and uninsured risks. Then we move to, and it's quite ironic that we move to commoditization at a time when risks are more complex. We're trying to simplify insurance buying even more than it should be. And granted, the example I'm about to give you is for personal lines, but if you watch television at all, you're going to be inundated with billions of dollars of invested advertising, primarily in personal lines, on how easy it is to buy insurance, or how it needs to be easy, and you can buy it from us in a way that's really easy, and how you can pay what you want, pay for only what you need. Here's a pricing tool. Here's save 15% in 15 minutes. There's all this advertising to essentially send a message, and it's now merging into the business advertising as well. But all the messaging is around you can save money and do this whole thing easily. An increasing commoditization at a time when we have increasing complexity is not a good combination. And I believe we can all agree that it is highly likely that after being inundated for years and years about save money in a few minutes, and that's all you need to do is to call this number, go to this website, and handle your insurance and save money quickly, that's having an impact across the board. And when you add the complexity with the increasing commoditization, we end up with big problems. And then, as mentioned, The buying process is exceedingly flawed. The buying process of inviting agents in, brokers in, assigning them insurance markets, telling them to go out to market, get them the best price on this pile of paper that I'm going to hand over to you, or this PDF I'm going to email to you. Here's my policies, here's my loss runs, here's my various schedules that you need. Go forth and get me a great price. And way too many brokers say, okay, I'll do that, with the idea that later they'll come in, they'll talk about their services and their resources and all of these things. But the process has been set up as a commodity play, and it's extraordinarily difficult if there's not leadership at the outset, that there will be an opportunity for leadership later. The buying process, the process of managing risk and buying insurance, is exceedingly flawed. You don't see anywhere in this picture where there's a comprehensive dialogue around risks. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we move along. So let's jump into where we likely have under or inadequate insurance or uninsurance. And we start with probably the most basic of coverages, building coverage. Now, over the last year or two, I've been asking brokers all across the country, do you have any clients with a substantive property line, a big building that you insure? Yes. Okay, if it were significantly damaged today, what's your level of confidence that things would go well, that there would be adequate insurance, and that the client would be very satisfied with the way their insurance is programmed to address a catastrophic property loss? And there's not a high degree of confidence. And part of that is not because people aren't, interested in doing a great job. It's just that this is exceedingly complex. It's not easy to establish property limits, especially when we have the added complexity of ordinance or law coverage. It's not like we can just say, I'm going to set this limit, and if that limit is adequate to rebuild the building, we're all good, because that's not the way most policies are set up. They're set up whereby you have one limit for replacement cost of like or similar kind as it sits there today, but you need additional coverage to bring it up to code or haul off the remaining portion of a damaged building, or. There's two separate coverages, which makes this exceedingly complex. I'm sure there's exceptions. There's a carrier out there that combines the two. Actually, I know there is, but it's rare. Most policies are extraordinarily difficult to program, to get the replacement cost of a building, to actually replace it back to where it was. Let me restate that. To actually rebuild the building and get the business back up and running again without significant complications arising out of how the insurance policy was programmed. And then this is another area that is hard. Folks, we're not suggesting this stuff is easy. If it was easy, we wouldn't even be talking about it. But the inadequate or even the lack of coverage in business income and extra expense. Now, as we're presenting this webinar, there's a lot of discussion right now about whether or not a virus, a company that shuts down arising out of the COVID-19 virus, is that considered property damage? That is likely going to be litigated for the next who knows how long. And my position today is certainly not to take a position on that. But how many folks have even had conversations around business income and extra expense, let alone whether or not viruses are considered causing property damage? This is difficult stuff, getting the business income properly programmed, helping people understand that you need this during your period of recovery, that actual loss sustained for 12 months is likely not adequate for a business of any real circumstance. Perhaps if you have a small retail location inside a strip mall, maybe that would be enough, but it's rare that substantive building having substantive damage could rebuild in 12 months. It's not easy, it's complex, but it's critically important. Flood is something that we know that a high percentage of people need flood coverage that don't have it. And they typically go by, well, it's never flooded here. Well, we're seeing increasing floods where there's not flooded before. And where it's not flooded before, if you're not in a floodplain, it's less costly. Let's not make the decision as to whether or not somebody needs flood coverage or would like to purchase flood coverage. Let's talk about it. As we move into the general liability space, especially as we present today, we have, depending upon who you talk to, a firming market or a hard market, which means rates are going up in general liability as we speak today, but also coverages are being either limited or in some cases excluded. Insurance Services Office copyrighted forms have their standard exclusions and standard exclusion endorsements. But also carriers are issuing very policy-specific exclusions, or it depends on the industry perhaps, depends on the carrier certainly. We need to pay closer attention. There's so many folks that believe out there, I've got a general liability policy, if I get sued, I'm okay. That may not be the case. There may be exclusions in that policy that even the broker may not be aware of. And that goes on to how many of your clients are signing contracts today, last week, last month, tomorrow, and they're indemnifying and holding people harmless and adding them as additional, or being told that they need to add their client as additional insured, committing that they will do that under contract. But yet they're assuming all of those liabilities under contract, but they may or may not be transferring them to the insurance policy. Way too frequently, businesses and business leaders are assuming liabilities that are not transferred adequately to the insurance policy. We're seeing an increased incidence of carriers that would like to use symbol 7 for liability on the business auto policy. That kind of risk keeps me up at night. It means that every vehicle must absolutely be on the vehicle schedule, or there is no liability coverage for a vehicle that is not listed on the schedule, which is, people tell me that it's not difficult, that it's easy to keep schedules up to speed and make sure that all the vehicles that are owned by the company are on the schedule. But I have stories to the contrary. I have anecdotal stories to the contrary, and symbol 7 under liability creates a big risk and something we need to pay very close attention to. Moving on to workers' compensation, especially now where we have so many employees working from home. If an employee lives in a state that is separate from a different state from the headquartered state, is the work comp policy adequately programmed? Traveling employees, there's going to be less of that for a while, but there's still going to be traveling employees. There's still going to be people temporarily deployed elsewhere. Other states' coverage is not simple, it's complex, and frequently leaves employers and employees uninsured if it's not handled properly. United States longshore and harbor workers coverage, risks that arise out of United States longshore and harbor workers exposure. Originally, this coverage was intended, this risk was intended for really maritime operations, stevedores and shipbreakers. But over the years, the courts have expanded it, where now a plumbing, heating and air, electrical contractor could incidentally wander into a US L&H risk. And the benefits are extraordinarily high. The cost would be immense if we had an uncovered claim here. And on top of that, to make matters worse, the officers of the company's personal assets could be at risk, because the corporate veil could be pierced to go after personal assets to pay this claim. It's a federal act which allows that to occur. Employment practices liability. We're seeing, fortunately, more employers buy this coverage than they did 10 years ago. There's an increasing awareness around employment-related discrimination and all the protected classes type of claims. There's still, though, lacking coverage in many areas, including one policy is a more robust policy than another. I would say that there's a distinct difference from policy to policy to policy with respect to coverage. And we need to pay a close very close look at that. The risks arising out of employees are increasing. We're seeing, you can see by this slide, from 1997 to 2017, Fair Labor Standards Act, which is your wage and hour type stuff, those lawsuits are up 417%. Many employment practices liability policies don't even cover wage and hour, let alone the defense cost. So we may need to pay close attention to that. This is dramatically on the rise, as you can see. Fiduciary coverage is not something we talk about frequently, or not something that at least brokers that we work with talk about frequently, but the risks are on the rise as well. You can Google 401k class action suits. You'll see a whole ton of lawsuits against 401k issues, or with arising out of 401k issues. And that's now, we're being told that plaintiffs' attorneys are going to use that case law to come after fiduciary risks in the group health space, which again puts the officers and owners' personal assets at risk, because this is ERISA liability that is a federal act that allows corporate veils to be pierced. You can see here there's a gentleman by the name of David McFarlane. You may want to follow him, and he talks about how the plaintiff's bar is looking to get into the healthcare space, that employee premiums and other costs such as copays, types of coverage, pharmacy rebates should be considered ERISA plan assets, and that every decision a plan sponsor, that could even include an HR person, with respect to the use of those plan assets, is a fiduciary decision, and fiduciary liability, fiduciary responsibility is a big responsibility, a significant responsibility, and not an easy one to maintain. Employee benefits liability is simpler, even though it is less robust. It's still an important coverage. Primarily deals with the clerical administration of employee benefits and the errors that could occur there. I mentioned cyber risks earlier. Incredibly complex, becoming increasingly so by the day. We would encourage brokers to align with experts, whether that be carriers that have a very specific expertise in a space, a team that's staying on top of it, or managing general agencies that are doing that, or cybersecurity experts. Please don't try to do this alone. You need expert advice to help, and it's a fast-moving, evolving area of risk. We could go on and on. We could spend days talking about this, which we're not. We could talk about the risks and oversights that arise out of pollution, umbrella forms, professional liability, employee fraud and embezzlement, employee theft, reputational risks. But we're not going to take all those on today. The idea was what can we do right away to improve the risk profile of our clients, to improve the protection, or at the very least, to help our clients and prospective clients make more intentional, informed decisions around risk, and to assess the risks that they have, and to help them identify the various ways of dealing with those risks, which include properly transferring them to an insurance policy. So how do we keep the uninsured risk and inadequate insurance crisis from eroding the health of your company and your career? How do we do that? Well, we can't keep doing what we've been doing. We have to disrupt the status quo. We have to help people to stop buying insurance and managing risk in the way in which they currently do. Now, that's not easy. People don't like to be told what to do. We have to bring an immense amount of empathy, an immense amount of diplomacy, an immense amount of humility to the conversation, but we have to lead them out of harm's way. We have to lead them to a better way to buy insurance and manage risk. And we do that by integrating the messaging to start the conversation, the getting in the door messaging that positions it, and then a conversation that seamlessly integrates without overwhelming or confusing the prospect or client even, the technical aspects of risk with the sales conversation. Not easy, but essential, necessary. And we must integrate all of this. We must build a process, and this is an example on your screen, which leads to a designated comprehensive risk assessment stage, a delineated risk assessment stage. Now, that's not always easy. I'll say it differently. That is not easy. We don't have anybody today sitting aggressively by the phone, waiting for your call and saying, gosh, I've just been waiting for somebody to call me up and offer me a comprehensive risk assessment of my business. Said no one ever. We have to lead them to understand why they need it, because they're in the all I want is a better price mode. You're not going to find people that want risk assessments. You have to create them. You have to help them understand what they're risking if they don't have a comprehensive risk assessment conversation. So when they say, here, take my policies, loss runs, vehicle list, and other schedules, here, take my census or copy of my current plan, whether you're a benefits broker, we have to say, no, let's pique their curiosity around how that is a flawed process. We can't tell people that they're wrong. We have to lead them to discover that and pique their curiosity that they're likely at risk and there's a better way to do this. So what's your risk assessment process? Is it comprehensive? Is it consistent? Is it ongoing? Is it something you deploy with every single prospect and client? Or is it hit and miss? Is it something you go, well, this particular prospect is just a price buyer, so I'll go down that path? No, we have to lead with every ounce of capability, skill, and insight that we have, lead people away from that flawed process. So to summarize, I ask you the question, ask yourself, do you believe the vast majority of employers and their businesses are at significant risk for adverse financial events that could change their life for generations to come and are likely not even aware of it? And due to the complexity, due to the commoditization, due to the flawed processes, this is going to keep going unless a number of brokers step up and say, we're going to lead differently. We're going to transform the way in which we engage with folks. And we're going to improve their outcomes. If you want to learn more, don't hesitate. Give us a call. You see the number on the screen. Or you can email me at frank@oceanuspartners.com. Feel free to reach out if you have questions, comments, thoughts. You want to learn more about what we're talking about here. It is an incredible differentiator and a sustainable competitive advantage to bring an alternative approach to address the problems we talked about in this webinar. So thank you for listening. Thank you for participating. We look forward to connecting with you down the road.